Welcome to Crossdressing Stories. Here, we share personal stories, celebrate self-expression. If you're on your own journey or simply curious, you've found your community. Subscribe and join the conversation.
Tom Callahan's world smelled of pine shavings, linseed oil, and a quiet, settled grief. At 42, he was a carpenter, a man who found solace in the clean lines of a dovetail joint and the smooth finish of a perfectly sanded plank. His workshop, set behind their small house, was his sanctuary, a place of order and logic in a world that had become brutally chaotic 2 years ago. That was when Claire, his vibrant, laughing wife who brought all the color to his monochrome life, had passed away after a short illness. She had left a Claire-shaped hole in his life and in the heart of their 8-year-old daughter, Lily. Lily was her mother's miniature, with the same honey-colored hair and eyes that held a mischievous spark grief hadn't quite managed to extinguish. She was the reason Tom got up every morning. He made her lunches, braided her hair, a task his calloused woodworker's fingers still fumbled with, and helped her with her homework. He was a good father, a devoted one. But he knew he couldn't be the one person Lily missed the most. He couldn't be her mom. One Tuesday afternoon, Tom was in his workshop, sanding the edge of a bookcase, when Lily burst in, her face lit with an excitement he hadn't seen in a long time. "Daddy, Daddy, look," she chirped, waving a pink piece of paper in her hand. Tom switched off the sander, the loud whirring descending into a low hum and then silence. He wiped the sawdust from his hands and took the paper. It was a flyer, decorated with glittery butterflies and flowers. At the top, in a swirling script, were the words, "Northwood Elementary's 5th Annual Mother-Daughter Spring Gala. It's a talent show and a dance-off, and they're going to crown a queen and a princess," Lily said, almost breathless with excitement. "Mommy promised. She promised we would go when I was old enough. She said we would sing our song and she would make us matching dresses." Tom's heart clenched. He remembered those conversations, the happy whispers between Claire and a much smaller Lily. It was one of their little future dreams, now just another painful memory. "Oh, sweetie," he began, his voice gentle. "I'm not sure." "Please, Daddy," Lily begged, her wide eyes filled with a desperate, fierce hope. "I want to go. For Mommy." Tom's first instinct was to protect her, to explain gently that this was an event he couldn't take her to, that it was for mothers, and that it would just make them both sad. He knelt down, ready to deliver the gentle, heartbreaking dose of reality. "I know it's for moms," Lily said, her voice suddenly small, as if she had read his thoughts. "But, look." She pointed a small finger to the bottom of the glittery flyer. He squinted, reading the fine print he had overlooked. In a neat, parenthetical aside, it read, "Northwood Elementary is proud to be an inclusive community. In the absence of a mother, any designated female guardian or role model is welcome to attend in her place." "See?" Lily said, her hope surging back. A designate female goal model. So we just need one of them." Tom's heart sank even further. Who could he possibly ask? His own mother lived 3 states away. Claire's sister, Beth, was a wonderful aunt, but she was a busy doctor with a family of her own, and asking her to fly in for a school dance felt like an impossible imposition. All their local friends were couples, and asking one of the wives felt awkward, like asking for a pity date on behalf of his daughter. He spent the next 2 days in a state of quiet, agonizing indecision. He tried to distract Lily with other things, a trip to the zoo, a promise to build her a new dollhouse. But she was single-minded. Every conversation came back to the gala. She had already picked out their talent, "You Are My Sunshine," the song Claire used to sing to her every night. She had drawn pictures of the matching dresses her mother had promised to make. The drawings were what broke him. They were crayon and marker masterpieces, showing 2 smiling figures. One was a small girl with honey-colored hair. The other was a tall, graceful woman with the same hair, both wearing beautiful, flowing blue dresses. It was a perfect, heartbreaking image of a future that would never happen. On Thursday evening, he was tucking Lily into bed. She was quiet, her earlier excitement replaced by a sad resignation. "It's okay, Daddy," she whispered into her pillow. "I know we can't find a goal model. It's okay." Hearing the defeat in her voice was worse than any tantrum. He sat on the edge of her bed, the image of her drawing burning in his mind. The tall, graceful figure in the blue dress. The matching hair. He looked at his own reflection in the dark bedroom window. He was tall. He had Claire and Lily's honey-colored hair, a feature he had always been slightly self-conscious of. An idea, a wild, insane, and utterly terrifying idea, sparked in the back of his mind. It was born of pure, desperate love and a carpenter's simple, problem-solving logic. The problem was not that Lily didn't have a mother. The problem was that the flyer required a designated female role model. It was a loophole. A crazy, impossible loophole. He thought of Claire. He thought of her boundless, fearless spirit, of how she would laugh and tell him to just go for it. He thought of Lily's sad, hopeful face. What was a father's dignity worth compared to his daughter's happiness? "What if," he said slowly, the words feeling foreign and heavy in his mouth. "What if I was your role model, sweetie?" Lily turned over, her eyes wide in the dim light. "But you're a daddy." "I know," he said, his heart pounding. "But what if, just for one night, I wasn't?" Lily didn't immediately understand. She just stared at him, her brow furrowed in the way it did when she was trying to solve a particularly tricky math problem. "What do you mean?" Tom took a deep breath. "I mean," he said, the words feeling even more absurd now that he was saying them out loud, "the flyer says you need a female role model. What if I dressed up as one? So I could take you?" The confusion on Lily's face slowly melted away, replaced by a look of dawning, wondrous realization. A slow, mischievous smile, a smile he hadn't seen since before Claire got sick, spread across her face. Like in a play," she whispered, her eyes shining. "Exactly," he said, seizing the metaphor with a sense of profound relief. "Like I'm playing a character. For one night only. So we can go to the gala together and sing our song." "You would do that," she breathed, her voice filled with awe. "I would do anything for you," he said, and he had never meant anything more. The next morning, a Saturday, was the beginning of their secret, impossible project. The first step, Lily declared with the authority of a seasoned director, was the costume. And there was only one place to find it. With a shared look of nervous excitement, they went upstairs to the one room in the house that had remained untouched for 2 years, Claire's closet. Tom pushed the door open. The air inside was still and smelled faintly of his wife's perfume, a soft, floral scent that hit him with the force of a physical blow. Her clothes still hung in neat rows, a vibrant timeline of their life together. The sundress she wore on their first date. The elegant blue dress from his brother's wedding. Her collection of soft, worn-in sweaters. It was a beautiful, heartbreaking museum of a life cut short. He hadn't been able to bring himself to pack it away. Now he was here to rate it. "We need to find something that fits," Lily said, her voice a reverent whisper as she ran her small hand over a silk blouse. "And it has to be blue. Like in my drawing." Tom was a tall, slender man, but he was still a man. Claire had been tall for a woman, with a graceful, athletic build, but her clothes were still cut for a woman's frame. They gently took down a few dresses, holding them up against his body. Most were too narrow in the shoulders, too short in the waist. Then, at the very back of the closet, tucked away in a garment bag, they found it. It was a dress he had forgotten about, one she had bought for a formal event they never got to attend. It was a simple, elegant wrap dress made of a deep, sapphire blue jersey fabric. The material was stretchy, forgiving. The wrap style meant it was adjustable. With a trembling hand, Tom took off his t-shirt and, with Lily's solemn assistance, he slipped the dress on over his jeans. He wrapped the sash around his waist and tied it. They both turned to look in the full-length mirror on the back of the door. The effect was strange. The fabric clung to his frame, the deep V-neck showing the top of his collarbones. The skirt flowed down to his mid-calves, the soft jersey draping over his legs. It wasn't a perfect fit, the shoulders were a little tight, the waistline a little high, but it wasn't a joke either. In the dim, dusty light of the closet with his honey-colored hair falling into his eyes, the image in the mirror was surprisingly, unsettlingly plausible. He looked at Lily. She was staring at his reflection, her expression unreadable. For a moment, he feared he had made a terrible mistake, that he had scared her, that this was all too weird. Then she gave a small, approving nod. "Now we just need shoes," she said, her voice filled with a new, serious sense of purpose. "And makeup. And you can't walk like a daddy." The week leading up to the gala became their secret project, a clandestine operation conducted after school behind the closed doors of the living room. Lily, armed with the authority of the flyer and a child's unwavering belief in the magic of dress-up, became his director, his coach, and his harshest critic. Their first training session was on walking. "Mommy didn't stomp," Lily instructed, demonstrating with an exaggerated, graceful glide across the rug. She took smaller steps. And her hips did this swishy thing. Tom, wearing the blue dress over his work clothes to get used to the feel of the fabric, tried to imitate her. He felt ridiculous, a clumsy giant trying to learn the steps of a delicate dance. The jersey skirt swirled around his legs, a constant, foreign presence. "No, Daddy, not like that." Lily would giggle. "You look like a penguin." He practiced for hours, walking back and forth, trying to soften his heavy, purposeful gait. He learned to shorten his stride, to move with a quietness that was the antithesis of his usual workshop clumping. He never quite mastered the swishy thing, but he did manage a walk that was less carpenter and more neutral. Next came the shoes. They found a pair of Claire's old wedge sandals in the back of the closet. They were a simple, navy blue pair with a low, 2-inch heel. Mercifully, Claire's feet had been only one size smaller than his, and he managed to squeeze his own into them. The elevation was disorienting, pitching his weight forward and making his calf muscles ache. "You have to practice," Lily insisted, and so he did. He would wear them around the house in the evenings, washing dishes and making dinner in the strange, uncomfortable shoes, Lily watching his every move. The most intimidating lesson was makeup. Neither of them knew the first thing about it. Their solution was the internet. They sat side by side on the sofa, huddled over Lily's tablet, watching simple, natural makeup for beginners tutorials. They learned about foundation, mascara, and the terrifyingly precise art of eyeliner. Armed with their new knowledge, they made a secret trip to the drugstore, a mission that felt as fraught with peril as any spy movie. Tom, feeling intensely self-conscious, bought a small, carefully selected arsenal of cosmetics, his heart pounding as he paid the cashier, sure she could read his mind. That evening, with Lily directing from a printout of a tutorial, he sat in front of the bathroom mirror and tried to apply the makeup. It was a disaster. The foundation was streaky. He smudged the mascara, giving himself what looked like a black eye. The lipstick, a soft rose color Claire had loved, looked garish and wrong on his own thin lips. "We need more practice," Lily said with a sigh, her directorial patience clearly being tested. He scrubbed his face clean and tried again. And again. Slowly, painstakingly, he got better. He learned to apply the foundation with a light touch, to use the mascara wand with a steadier hand. The goal wasn't to look like a beautiful woman. The goal, he realized, was to soften the hard, masculine lines of his face, to create a version of himself that was less daddy and more ambiguous. It was the hardest, strangest, and most delicate woodworking project he had ever undertaken. The final piece of their project was the talent show. Lily was adamant they perform "You Are My Sunshine," the lullaby that had been the soundtrack to her entire childhood. Tom's heart ached at the thought. Singing it without Claire felt like a betrayal, a beautiful melody played on a broken instrument. But Lily was determined. "We have to practice the harmony part, Daddy," she said one evening, pulling out the small, slightly battered acoustic guitar that had been Claire's. Mommy always sang the high part. Tom, who had a passable, if quiet, baritone voice, had always sung the low harmony. He sat on the edge of the sofa, the familiar weight of the guitar in his lap. He hadn't played it since the funeral. He strummed a simple G chord, the notes sounding dusty and sad in the quiet room. Lily began to sing the first verse, her voice small and sweet, but clear as a bell. The other night, dear, as I lay sleeping. When the chorus came, she looked at him expectantly. He opened his mouth, but the low harmony, his part, wouldn't come. His throat was tight with unshed tears. I can't, sweetie, he whispered, his fingers stilling on the strings. It hurts too much. Lily looked at him, her own eyes welling up. But then a look of fierce, 8-year-old determination crossed her face. No, she said. We have to. Mommy would want us to. She took a shaky breath. If you can't sing the daddy part, then you have to sing the mommy part. He stared at her. The high part? Lily, I can't sing that high. You have to try, she insisted. For the character. It was a preposterous idea. His voice was a low rumble, not a clear soprano. But looking at his daughter's desperate, pleading face, he knew he had to try. He took a deep breath, and as Lily started the chorus again, he reached for the notes. He pushed his voice up into a falsetto, a thin, breathy, and ridiculously fragile sound. It was weak. It was wobbly. It was nothing like Claire's beautiful, effortless harmony. But it was a harmony. They sang the whole song through, Lily's sweet melody weaving around his strange, fragile falsetto. It was a broken, beautiful, and utterly heartbreaking sound. By the end, they were both crying, silent tears streaming down their faces. But they were also smiling. They practiced every night that week. Slowly, his falsetto got stronger, more confident. He learned to control the breath, to find the notes without them cracking. It was still a man's voice, pretending, but it was becoming a more convincing pretense. He was learning a new way to sing, just as he was learning a new way to walk. He was stretching his own boundaries, pushing himself into an uncomfortable, unfamiliar register, all for her. One evening, as they finished the song, Lily laid her head on his shoulder. You sound pretty, Daddy, she whispered. He looked at their reflection in the dark window, the big, clumsy man and the small, determined girl, huddled together over a guitar. Pretty was not a word he had ever associated with himself. But as he held his daughter, the echo of his wife's favorite song still hanging in the air, he felt a strange, unexpected flicker of something that felt a lot like grace. The evening of the gala arrived in a flurry of nervous, excited energy. The house felt like a backstage dressing room before a major premiere. Tom, having sent Lily to a neighbor's house for an hour to get ready in secret, stood in front of his bathroom mirror for the final transformation. This was not a practice run. This was the real performance. His hands, usually so steady with a chisel or a plane, trembled slightly as he began the makeup routine. He moved slowly, methodically, following the steps they had practiced. The light foundation, the careful swipe of mascara, the soft, rose-colored lipstick. He looked at his reflection. The effect was still jarring, but it was the best he could do. It was a face that was softer, less defined, and hopefully just ambiguous enough. The hardest part was his hair. His honey-colored hair was the same as Lily's, but it was a man's haircut, short and practical. Claire had owned a few wigs for fun, for costume parties, but none of them seemed right. Then he remembered something else. He went into her closet and opened a hat box on the top shelf. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a beautiful, wide-brimmed straw hat, decorated with a simple blue silk ribbon. She had worn it on their last summer vacation. He put it on. The wide brim cast a soft shadow over the top half of his face, obscuring his hairline and his still too masculine brow. It was a simple, elegant piece of misdirection. It was perfect. Finally, the dress. He slipped the sapphire blue jersey over his head. The fabric felt cool and familiar now. He tied the sash, took one last look in the full-length mirror, and then put on the low, wedge-heeled sandals. The character was complete. When he went to pick up Lily, she was waiting on the neighbor's porch, a vision in a simple, cornflower blue dress that Claire had made for her last spring. She looked so much like her mother in that moment that it took Tom's breath away. Lily's eyes went wide when she saw him. She slowly walked around him, her expression a mixture of a child's wonder and a director's critical appraisal. She looked at the dress, the hat, the hint of makeup in the fading evening light. Wow, she breathed. You look like a lady from a storybook." Tom's heart swelled with a relief so profound it almost buckled his knees. That was all he wanted. Not to be beautiful, not to be a woman. Just to be a character from a story, a placeholder for the person who was supposed to be there. The school gymnasium was a cacophony of noise, music, and the high-pitched chatter of 100 little girls. It was decorated with pink and purple streamers and smelled of popcorn and perfume. Tom's entrance, with Lily's hand clutched tightly in his, caused a few curious glances, but nothing more. In the dim, festive lighting under the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat, he was just another tall, slightly awkward parent. He was Liana, the name Lily had decided on for his character. Liana, the quiet, shy friend of the family. He saw other mothers he recognized from school drop-offs, women he had nodded to 100 times. Tonight, they just gave him a polite, slightly puzzled smile, their minds trying to place the new face. He just smiled back, a small, demure smile, and kept his eyes downcast, just as Lily had coached him. He felt like an imposter, a spy behind enemy lines. But as he looked down at his daughter, her face shining with pure, unadulterated joy, he knew he was in exactly the right place. Navigating the gala was like trying to walk through a foreign country whose language and customs he barely understood. Tom, now Liana, felt a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety. He was used to being a father, a comfortable, established role. Being a mother was a minefield of unspoken social rules. He followed Lily's lead. She pulled him towards the craft table, where they decorated paper crowns with glitter and plastic jewels. He sat on a small, child-sized chair that made his knees ache, his large, carpenter's hands feeling clumsy as he glued a purple jewel onto Lily's crown. He watched the other mothers. He saw the easy, laughing camaraderie between them, the shared language of knowing glances and quick, supportive touches on the arm. They talked about summer camps, playdates, and the latest school gossip. He sat in a state of quiet, smiling observation, offering nothing, a tall, silent woman in a blue dress and a wide-brimmed hat. "You're very quiet," a cheerful, red-haired woman said, sitting down next to him. It was Mrs. Gable, the mother of one of Lily's friends. "I'm Susan. I don't think we've met." "Liana," Tom said, his voice a soft, slightly higher than usual murmur. "A friend of the family. I'm here with Lily." "Oh, that's so sweet of you to bring her," Susan Gable said. "She's such a wonderful girl. It's been so hard on her, losing her mom." Tom is a great dad, of course, but a girl needs, well, you know. She gestured vaguely, a shared, woman-to-woman understanding that Tom absolutely did not understand, but nodded at anyway. The conversation was a series of gentle, terrifying hurdles. Susan asked him about his work. "I'm in design," he fudged, thinking of his workshop. She asked him about his own children. "Not yet," he said, the life feeling surprisingly painful. He felt like he was constantly on the verge of being discovered, of saying the wrong thing, of revealing the deep-voiced, sawdust-covered man under the dress. The first major event was the dance-off. An upbeat pop song blasted from the speakers, and the gym floor became a swirling mass of mothers and daughters, laughing and dancing with joyful abandon. Lily grabbed his hand, her eyes shining. "Come on, Liana." He was a terrible dancer. He had always been a terrible dancer. He had 2 left feet and the grace of a falling bookcase. But he took his daughter's hands, and he let her lead him onto the dance floor. He moved awkwardly, stiffly, a far cry from the graceful, swaying mothers around him. But Lily didn't care. She was laughing, a pure, uninhibited peal of joy that he hadn't heard in 2 years. She was just a little girl, dancing with her parent at a school party. In that moment, it didn't matter if the parent was a mom or a dad in a dress. All that mattered was the shared, spinning, laughing joy. He looked down at her happy, upturned face, and for a few precious minutes, the anxiety melted away, and he felt nothing but a profound, overwhelming love. After the dance-off, it was time for the talent show. Tom's anxiety, which had briefly receded, came rushing back with a vengeance. It was one thing to blend into the crowd on a dimly lit dance floor. It was another thing entirely to stand on a brightly lit stage and sing. He and Lily huddled together near the side of the stage, waiting their turn. They watched a girl do a surprisingly adept magic trick with her mother as the assistant. They watched another pair perform a synchronized gymnastics routine. The level of talent was unnervingly high. "I'm scared," Lily whispered, clutching his hand. "Me too," he whispered back, his own throat suddenly dry. "And now, the principal, Mrs. Davison, announced from the stage, let's have a warm welcome for Lily Callahan and her family friend, Liana." A polite ripple of applause went through the gym. Holding Lily's hand, Tom walked up the small set of stairs and into the spotlight. The light was blindingly bright. He couldn't see the faces in the audience, only a dark, anonymous sea of people. He sat on the small stool that had been set out for him and picked up the acoustic guitar. His hands were trembling, and he fumbled for a moment as he adjusted the strap. He looked at Lily. She was standing beside him, her small hands clasped in front of her, looking out at the darkness. She looked terrified. He gave her a small, encouraging nod, a silent message just between the two of them. "We can do this." He took a slow, calming breath and strummed the first, simple chord of "You Are My Sunshine." The sound was small and fragile in the big, echoing gym. Lily began to sing, her voice a little shaky at first, but clear and sweet. "The other night, dear, as I lay sleeping." She got through the first verse, and then it was time for the chorus. She looked at him, her eyes wide. This was his part. The harmony. The mommy part. He opened his mouth, and for a terrifying second, no sound came out. Then he thought of Claire. He thought of all the nights he had listened to her sing this very harmony to their daughter. He closed his eyes, and he sang. The note that came out was that strange, breathy falsetto. It was not a woman's voice. Anyone listening closely could tell it was a man's voice, pushed up into an unnatural, fragile register. It was flawed. It was imperfect. But it was a harmony. It wrapped around Lily's sweet, clear melody like a gentle, protective hug. As they continued to sing, something magical happened. Lily, hearing the harmony beside her, grew more confident. Her voice got stronger, bolder. And Tom, drawing strength from his daughter, found his own falsetto becoming surer, less wobbly. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray." They were no longer just a father and a daughter, awkwardly performing on a stage. They were two people sharing a memory. They were singing a song that was so full of their shared love and their shared loss that the very air in the gym seemed to become still and quiet. The audience, which had been murmuring and rustling, fell completely silent, captivated by the raw, heartbreaking honesty of the performance. They finished the final chorus, the last, gentle chord of the guitar fading into the silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, the applause started. It wasn't the polite, dutiful applause from before. It was a loud, spontaneous, and deeply emotional wave of support that washed over them on the stage. Tom looked out, and in the bright stage light, he could just make out a few faces in the front row. Susan Gable was wiping a tear from her eye. And even the principal, Mrs. Davison, had a look of profound, gentle understanding on her face. They didn't know his secret, not really. But they had understood the story. They had heard the love. Overwhelmed and emotional, Tom and Lily practically fled the stage after their performance. They found a quiet corner near the bleachers, their hearts still pounding. Lily was vibrating with a mixture of pride and relief. "We did it, Daddy," she whispered, her face glowing. "We really did it." "You were amazing, sweetie," he said, pulling her into a hug. "Your mommy would have been so proud." The final event of the evening was the crowning ceremony. It wasn't a competition, as Lily had thought, but a tradition. The principal would draw names from a jar to crown the queen and princess of the Spring Gala, a symbolic honor for a mother-daughter pair who embodied the spirit of the evening. Tom had no interest in it. He just wanted to take his daughter home, the emotional toll of the night suddenly hitting him with the force of a wave. But Lily, caught up in the fairy tale magic of the evening, wanted to stay. Mrs. Davison stood on stage by a large, glittery jar filled with slips of paper. And now, she announced, to crown our queen and princess. She reached into the jar. Our princess for this evening is Lily Callahan. Lily gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. A look of pure, unadulterated joy lit up her face. Tom's own weariness vanished, replaced by a surge of paternal pride. Go on, sweetie, he urged, nudging her forward. Lily practically skipped to the stage, where a smiling Mrs. Davison placed a glittering plastic tiara on her head. And now for our queen, Mrs. Davison announced, reaching back into the jar. She pulled out a slip of paper. She unfolded it, and for a split second, a look of brief, almost comical confusion flickered across her face before she quickly smoothed it into a professional smile. And our queen is Liana. Tom froze. A cold, sharp panic seized him. No, not me. It had to be a mistake. He wanted to be invisible, to melt into the shadows. The last thing on earth he wanted was to go back up on that stage, under those bright, unforgiving lights. But Lily was on the stage, her face ecstatic, turning and waving for him to come up. The entire gym was applauding, their faces turned towards him. He was trapped. His legs felt like lead as he walked towards the stage. He moved slowly, keeping his head down, the wide brim of his hat his only shield. He walked up the steps, every fiber of his being screaming at him to turn and run. He stood beside Lily in the center of the stage. Mrs. Davison approached him with the larger, even more glittery queen tiara. As she got closer, he could see the look in her eyes. It was not a look of suspicion, but of a deep, knowing kindness. He realized, with a jolt, that she had understood. Maybe not everything, but enough. She knew. She gently lifted the hat from his head. The hat, his shield, his primary piece of misdirection, was gone. The bright stage lights flooded down, illuminating his face completely. His short, masculine haircut. The faint, telltale shadow of a beard his makeup couldn't fully conceal. The strong, weathered lines of his 42-year-old face. A new sound rippled through the gymnasium. Not a gasp of shock this time, but a murmur of dawning, stunned realization. It was the dad from school drop-offs. It was Lily Callahan's father. Tom stood there exposed, his heart hammering against his ribs. He felt 100 pairs of eyes on him, seeing him for who he truly was. This was it. The moment of humiliation he had been dreading all night. He instinctively reached to take Lily's hand, to pull her away, to flee. But Lily didn't move. She just beamed up at him, her princess tiara slightly askew, and squeezed his hand tightly. Her expression was pure, unconditional love. She wasn't ashamed. She was proud. And in that moment, looking down at his daughter's radiant face, Tom's own fear and shame began to melt away, replaced by a fierce, protective pride. He had done this for her. He had nothing to be ashamed of. He straightened his back, not as a model, but as a father, and he met the gaze of the crowd, his own eyes clear and defiant. The murmuring in the crowd grew, a wave of confusion and whispers. Tom braced himself for the inevitable, the laughter, the pointing, the scandalized comments. He could already feel the hot flush of humiliation creeping up his neck. But the laughter never came. Instead, a single person in the audience began to clap. It was Susan Gable, the red-haired mother he had spoken to at the craft table. She was looking directly at him, not with pity or shock, but with a look of profound, teary-eyed admiration. Her applause was loud and deliberate in the otherwise buzzing room. Then another woman joined in. And another. Within seconds, the entire gymnasium was filled with a thunderous, rolling wave of applause. It was even louder, even more emotional, than the applause after their song. They weren't clapping for Liana, the fictional character. They weren't laughing at a man in a dress. They were clapping for a father. They were clapping for the fierce, beautiful, and utterly unconventional act of love they had just witnessed. They understood. Mrs. Davison, the principal, who was still holding the Queen's tiara, smiled a warm, genuine smile. With a gesture of quiet dignity, she gently placed the glittering crown on Tom's head, right on top of his short, masculine haircut. The tiara was absurd. It was a ridiculous, sparkly piece of plastic sitting on the head of a 42-year-old carpenter. But in that moment, it felt as heavy and meaningful as any crown in history. Lily squeezed his hand, her face a perfect portrait of pride. He looked down at her, and then out at the sea of smiling, applauding mothers and daughters. He saw no judgment in their eyes. He saw only respect. He saw community. He saw a shared understanding of the fierce, often crazy, lengths a parent would go to for their child. The rest of the evening was a blur. As they came down from the stage, they were surrounded, not by accusers, but by well-wishers. "That was the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," Susan Gable said, giving his arm a gentle squeeze. "Your daughter is a very lucky little girl," another mother said, her own eyes shining with tears. They weren't talking to Liana anymore. They were talking to Tom. They saw him, the man underneath the dress, and they weren't laughing. They were celebrating him. He spent the rest of the gala not hiding in a corner, but talking. Really talking. He talked to the other parents, not as an imposter, but as one of them. He talked about his workshop, about his struggles with braiding Lily's hair, about how much she missed her mom. And they talked back, sharing their own stories, their own struggles, their own joys. He was still wearing the blue dress, the makeup, and the ridiculous, wonderful tiara. But he no longer felt like he was in costume. The clothes were just clothes. The man wearing them, the father who loved his daughter enough to risk looking like a fool, had never been more himself. He had come to the gala expecting to perform a fiction, but had ended up revealing his deepest truth. They were among the last to leave the gymnasium. The streamers were starting to droop, and the air was thick with the smell of spilled punch and leftover popcorn. Lily, her princess tiara still firmly in place, was practically skipping, her energy seemingly boundless. Tom, on the other hand, felt a deep, bone-weary exhaustion settle over him. The adrenaline of the evening had faded, leaving a hollow ache in his muscles and his heart. They stepped out into the cool, quiet night. The spring air was fresh and clean after the stuffy gym. It was a short walk home, just a few blocks through their peaceful, tree-lined neighborhood. Lily chattered excitedly, recounting every moment of the gala, the dancing, the crafts, the moment their names were called. Tom walked beside her, his own queen's tiara still perched comically on his head, the blue dress swishing softly around his legs with each step. A car drove by, its headlights sweeping over them for a moment, illuminating the strange, fairy tale sight of a tall man in a dress and a tiara, holding hands with a small, tiara-wearing princess. The driver slowed down, a look of pure, baffled confusion on their face, and then sped up and drove away. Tom felt a flicker of the old self-consciousness, but it vanished as quickly as it came. He didn't care. He was too tired to care. As they turned onto their own street, Lily's excited chatter finally wound down. They walked in a comfortable silence for a moment, the only sound the soft click of his wedge heels on the pavement and the chirp of crickets in the darkness. "Daddy?" Lily said, her voice small and soft. "Yeah, sweetie." Tonight, it felt a little bit like Mommy was there, she whispered. Tom's throat tightened. He stopped under the gentle glow of a streetlight and knelt down so he was at her eye level. The blue dress pooled around him on the sidewalk. "I'm so glad, honey," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That's all I wanted." "It was the song," she said, her eyes serious. "And the dress. You looked like a memory of her." He reached out and gently tucked a stray strand of honey-colored hair behind her ear. "I miss her so much." "Me too," Lily whispered, and then she did something that completely undid him. She reached out with her small hand and gently, tenderly, wiped away a tear that was tracing a path through the foundation on his cheek. "It's okay, Liana," she said softly. He realized in that moment that for her, the character had been real. Liana wasn't a joke or a disguise. Liana was the embodiment of her mother's spirit, a magical storybook stand-in who had made it possible for them to feel close to Claire again. Liana was the person who could sing the mommy part of the song and wear the blue dress. And in his daughter's eyes, Liana was a hero. He pulled her into a fierce, gentle hug, his scratchy, makeup-covered cheek pressing against her soft one. He was her dad, and he was Liana. He was the queen and she was the princess. They were a strange, broken and beautiful little kingdom of two, standing under a streetlight, holding on to each other. The walk home wasn't just a journey from the school to their house. It was a journey back to each other, back in the quiet of their own home. The magical spell of the evening began to fade, replaced by the mundane reality of bedtime. Lily, exhausted but happy, was asleep almost the moment her head hit the pillow, her princess tiara placed carefully on her nightstand. Tom, however, was wide awake. He walked into his own bathroom and flipped on the harsh, unforgiving light. He stared at his reflection, and for a long moment, he didn't know who he was looking at. He saw a 42-year-old man with tired, grief-stricken eyes. But that man was wearing a woman's dress. His face was smeared with fading makeup, a clean track visible where Lily's small hand had wiped away a tear. And perched on his head, absurd and glorious, was a glittering plastic queen's tiara. It was the face of a man who had reached his breaking point and had somehow, miraculously, not broken. He slowly, methodically, began the process of deconstruction. He took off the tiara and placed it gently on the counter beside the sink. He lifted the wide-brimmed hat from the dresser and put it away. He reached behind his back and untied the sash of the blue dress. The jersey fabric slid from his shoulders, pooling in a soft, sapphire heap at his feet. He stood for a moment in just his boxers, the cool air of the bathroom a relief against his skin. Then, he turned to the face in the mirror. He took a washcloth and began to scrub away the layers of liana. The rose-colored lipstick came off first, then the faint dusting of powder, then the foundation, and finally, the stubborn mascara that had clung to his eyelashes. With each wipe of the cloth, a piece of the artifice was removed. He wasn't just washing off makeup. He was washing away the fear, the self-consciousness, the weight of the performance. He was washing away the character and revealing the man underneath. When he was done, he looked at his raw, clean-scrubbed face. It was just him again. Tom Callahan, the carpenter. The father. The widower. The same man who had woken up that morning. But something was different. The sadness in his eyes was still there. It would always be there. But it was no longer the only thing. He saw something else now, something new. He saw a flicker of the same fierce, defiant strength he had seen in his daughter's eyes. He saw a man who had been willing to look utterly ridiculous for the sake of love. A man who had found the courage to sing in a broken, borrowed voice. He had spent the evening trying to fill the massive, Claire-shaped hole in his daughter's life. He knew, logically, that he had failed. He could never be her mother. But what he had done, he realized, was prove that a father's love could be big enough and strange enough and brave enough to fill that space with something else. Not a replacement, but a testament. A tribute. He looked at the blue dress, lying on the floor. It was just a piece of fabric. But tonight, it had been a bridge. It had been a permission slip. It had been a kind of magic. He bent down, picked it up, and folded it gently, the soft jersey cool and comforting in his calloused hands. He had a feeling he wouldn't be putting it away just yet. Tom had expected the school drop-off on Monday morning to be an ordeal. He had envisioned awkward silences, pointed stares, and a gauntlet of whispered gossip. He had spent the weekend bracing himself for the social fallout, the inevitable consequence of being crowned queen of the mother-daughter gala. As he walked Lily to the school entrance, he felt a familiar tension settle in his shoulders. He kept his eyes down, his hand held tightly in Lily's, ready for the whispers. A few did come. He saw a couple of the dads, the ones who usually gave him a brisk, "Mornin', Tom," now huddled together, glancing in his direction with looks of pure, baffled amusement. He overheard one of them mutter, "Saw the pictures on Facebook. Can you believe it?" He gritted his teeth and kept walking. But then, something else happened. Susan Gable, the red-haired mother, saw him and broke away from her group, a bright, genuine smile on her face. "Tom. Good morning," she said, her voice deliberately loud and cheerful. "Lily was just telling Charlotte what a wonderful time you both had on Friday. That performance was something special." Her tone was so normal, so completely devoid of judgment, that it took him by surprise. It was a clear, public signal of her support. The other mothers in her group, who had been watching hesitantly, seemed to take their cue from her. They offered him small, warm smiles and nods of their own. "It really was lovely, Tom," another mother added. The whispers from the dads faltered, drowned out by the quiet chorus of female approval. Tom felt the tension in his shoulders begin to ease. He had been so focused on the potential judgment of the men that he had completely underestimated the verdict of the women. They had been the majority in that gym. They had understood. He gave Lily a final hug and kiss at the door, and as she ran off to join her friends, he turned to walk back to his truck. As he passed the group of dads, the one who had been muttering fell silent. One of them, a big guy named Frank who worked in construction, caught his eye. Tom braced himself. Frank just shook his head, a slow, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "Callahan," he said, his voice a low rumble of grudging respect. "You've got guts, man. I'll give you that." Tom just nodded, a weight he hadn't even realized he was carrying lifting from his chest. He hadn't just earned the respect of the mothers. In a strange, unexpected way, he had earned the respect of the fathers, too. He got back into his truck, the familiar scent of sawdust and coffee a comforting balm. The world hadn't ended. He hadn't become a social pariah. In fact, something had shifted. The polite, distant nods he usually exchanged with the other parents had been replaced by something warmer, something more real. He had shown them a part of himself, a vulnerable, ridiculous, and fiercely loving part. And instead of laughing at him, they had, in their own quiet way, welcomed him in. He had always felt like an outsider in the world of school bake sales and PTA meetings, a lone father in a sea of mothers. But by putting on a dress, he had, ironically, finally become one of them. The gala had cracked something open in Tom, a small fissure in the quiet, carefully constructed wall he had built around himself after Claire's death. He had spent 2 years focusing only on the necessities, his work, his daughter, his grief. He had forgotten that joy, even in its most absurd forms, could be a tool for healing. The blue dress was not packed away. It was hung carefully in a garment bag at the back of his own closet. The tiaras, both queen and princess, were placed on the mantelpiece in the living room, a silent, sparkly testament to their strange, wonderful night. A few weeks after the gala, Lily came home from school with a new flyer. It was for the school's annual end-of-year play. This year it was Cinderella. "They're having auditions, Daddy," she announced, her eyes shining. "Can I try out?" "Please." "Of course, sweetie," he said, his heart swelling. It was a sign of the new confidence he saw in her, a boldness that had been unlocked by their performance. She practiced her lines for him every night. She was trying out for the part of one of the friendly mice. But the day after the auditions, she came home looking crestfallen. "What's wrong, honey?" he asked. "I didn't get the part," she mumbled, staring at the floor. "Mrs. Davison said I was very good, but they couldn't find anyone to be the fairy godmother. So they might have to cancel the play." She looked up at him, a familiar, hopeful, and slightly mischievous glint in her eye. "She's supposed to be magical. And sing a song." Tom sighed, a slow, deep sound of weary resignation. But he was also smiling. He already knew what was coming next. "Let me guess," he said. "The costume has to be a big, beautiful dress?" The Northwood Elementary production of Cinderella was the talk of the town. The school gymnasium was packed not just with parents, but with people from the community who had heard the story of the father who had worn a dress for his daughter and now wanted to see the encore. Tom, as the fairy godmother, was a spectacular sight. He wore a magnificent, shimmering gown that the school's home EC class had helped sew, complete with a pair of enormous, glittery wings that he had expertly constructed in his own workshop from wire and iridescent fabric. His makeup was more confident this time. His falsetto song about dreams coming true was surprisingly strong, and he wielded a sparkling magic wand with a deadpan, paternal gravitas that the audience found absolutely hilarious. He wasn't just a stand-in this time. He was a full-blown character. And he was having, to his own profound surprise, a wonderful time. He discovered a hidden, theatrical part of himself he never knew existed. He loved the camaraderie of the parents who built the sets with him. He loved the sound of the children's laughter. He loved seeing the pure, uncomplicated joy on his daughter's face as she watched him from the wings. This became their new thing. Tom and Lily, the theatrical duo. He was the dame in the local Christmas pantomime. He was the booming, bearded Queen of Hearts in a summer production of Alice in Wonderland. He never tried to be a woman. He was always Tom, the dad, in a fabulous, ridiculous costume, playing a part to help his daughter and her friends put on a show. He became a local legend, the Carpenter Queen. His workshop, once a silent sanctuary of grief, was now often filled with the sound of Lily's laughter and the glitter from a half-finished prop. He was still building things. But he wasn't just building bookcases anymore. He was building stage sets. He was building community. He was building a new, joyful, and beautifully strange life for himself and his daughter. One rainy Saturday, a year after the first gala, Lily was on a mission. She was directing a small play for her and her friends to put on in the living room, and she needed the perfect props. This led them to the one place they hadn't explored together, the attic. The attic was a dusty, forgotten kingdom of their shared past. It was filled with old furniture, boxes of Tom's college textbooks, and holiday decorations. As Lily rummaged through a trunk of old Halloween costumes, Tom came across a large, flat portfolio case he didn't recognize. He wiped the dust from the cover. In Claire's elegant, looping handwriting, it was labeled, "The Blueprints." His brow furrowed. Claire had been a watercolor artist, a painter of landscapes and flowers. She didn't work with blueprints. His curiosity piqued, he unzipped the case. Inside, it wasn't architectural drawings. It was a collection of about a dozen exquisitely detailed fashion sketches. They were beautiful, bold, and unlike anything he had ever seen. They were designs for a collection of women's clothing, but with a unique, powerful twist. There were elegant dresses with the clean, strong lines of a well-made piece of furniture. There were jackets with sharp, structured shoulders and flowing trousers made to look like carved wood. Each sketch was annotated with notes about fabric, cut, and even the type of stitching, using a technical precision that was startling. At the back of the portfolio, he found a letter. It was an acceptance letter, dated 10 years ago, from a prestigious fashion design school in New York, offering her a full scholarship. Tom sank down onto an old trunk, the sketches spread across his lap, a profound, stunned silence enveloping him. He had no idea. In all their years together, she had never mentioned this. She had been a painter. That was the story he knew. He thought back. The scholarship letter was dated the same year he had decided to quit his steady job to start his own carpentry business. She had been his biggest supporter, taking on extra work as a freelance graphic designer to help pay the bills while he got his workshop off the ground. She had been the one to say, "Your dream is my dream, Tom." He realized with a sudden, heartbreaking clarity that she had quietly, without a word of complaint, packed away her own dream to make space for his. She had put her blueprints in the attic and had helped him build his own foundation. He looked at the sketches again, seeing them now through a blur of tears. He saw her spirit in every line. The strength, the elegance, the hidden structure beneath the beautiful surface. It was all her. Lily, having found a suitable pirate hat, came over to him. "What's that, Daddy?" she asked, looking at the drawings. It's a treasure map," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's a map your mommy drew a long time ago. And I think it's time we tried to follow it." The discovery in the attic changed everything. It was no longer just about helping Lily, about putting on school plays. It was about honoring Claire. It was about finishing the story she had started. Tom, a man who had never sewn a button in his life, brought the portfolio of sketches to a local seamstress, a kind, talented woman named Maria whose children were in the school plays. He showed her the designs. Maria looked at the detailed, professional sketches, her eyes wide with appreciation. "These are incredible, Tom," she said. "Your wife, she was a true artist." "I know," he said. "The thing is, I want to make them for her." And so began the most ambitious project of Tom's life. He was not a designer, but he was a master craftsman. He understood structure, form, and the integrity of materials. He approached Claire's designs not as a seamstress, but as a builder. He and Maria became an unlikely team. She would translate the language of the patterns, and he would translate the spirit of the designs. He would spend hours in fabric stores, not looking at colors, but feeling the texture, the weight, the grain of the cloth, just as he would with a piece of wood. He insisted on the highest quality materials, on reinforcing the seams, on making sure the bones of each garment were as strong and true as the frame of a house. His workshop was transformed. Sawdust now mingled with scraps of silk and wool. His workbench, usually covered in blueprints for cabinets, was now covered in Claire's beautiful, flowing designs. He wasn't just executing her vision, he was collaborating with her memory. He could feel her presence in every choice he made, her quiet, approving spirit guiding his hands. With Lily as their fit model and chief creative consultant, they spent the next year bringing the blueprint collection to life. The final piece they made was the one from the first sketch in the portfolio. It was a stunning, sapphire blue wrap dress, a more structured, more architectural version of the very dress he had worn to that first gala. Word of the project spread through their small, supportive community. Susan Gable, who had a background in event planning, insisted they put on a proper show. The school offered the gymnasium. The parents from the play volunteered to build the runway. The local news even ran a small story about the carpenter who builds dresses. The night of the show was not a high-fashion Paris event. It was a community hall, filled with friends, neighbors, and families. The models were not professionals. They were the mothers from the PDA, the teachers from the school, and Maria, the seamstress, all walking with a proud, joyful grace. The final look was modeled by Lily. She wore a small, perfectly tailored version of the sapphire blue dress. She walked the runway, not with a model's practice swagger, but with the simple, confident joy of a 9-year-old girl wearing a piece of her mother's heart. Tom watched from the wings, his own heart so full it felt like it might burst. He wasn't wearing a dress this time. He was just in his simple work shirt and jeans. He was the builder. After the show, Lily ran to him and threw her arms around his waist. "We did it, Daddy," she whispered into his shirt. "Mommy's blueprints. They're real now." He hugged her tight, the scent of pine from his workshop mingling with the new, hopeful scent of the fabric. He looked out at the happy, cheering crowd. The hole Claire had left in their lives would never truly be filled. But they had learned that you could build something new in that empty space. You could build a stage. You could build a community. You could even build a dress. You just had to follow the blueprint love had left behind.